The steady rumble of my tractor echoed through the pine-lined trail leading to my lakeside cabin ranch. Dawn had just broken, casting a warm golden hue over the calm waters of Lake Douglas when I spotted her, Karen, right in the middle of the road like she owned it, arms planted firmly on her hips, sunglasses sliding halfway down her nose, and that bright red bathrobe whipping in the breeze like she was the queen of the land. But it wasn't the robe that caught my eye, it was her rose garden. She had dragged out every single potted rose plant she owned and lined them smack in the center of my access road during the night, not beside it, not even in front of her house, no, right where my tractor needed to pass to reach the west field. At least a dozen ceramic pots overflowing with pink and yellow roses, laid out like a floral minefield, and there she stood, grinning like she'd finally won some long game. "You're not going anywhere today, cowboy," she snapped. "The HOA has decided all heavy machinery must be pre-approved." I sat there, the engine humming beneath me, staring her down. She wasn't bluffing. This woman genuinely believed she had the power to stop me from working my own land. Without breaking eye contact, I eased the tractor forward. Her smirk twitched. "Don't you dare," she warned. I didn't flinch. The front tire bumped the edge of the first pot. A loud crack echoed like a gunshot as the ceramic shattered. She gasped. Those were antiques. I hit the throttle, the engine roared, and I powered straight through the garden. Rose petals flew through the air, dirt splattered in every direction, and Karen let out a scream that would have rattled the dead. That's when the blue lights started flashing. "Now hold an eye because you won't believe who pulled up behind me that morning. But before we go there, let me back up and explain how this whole mess started. Drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Because this story isn't just about tractors and roses. It's about drawing lines, demanding respect, and recognizing when patience reaches its limit. I'm Nate, 44 years old, former military. I retired early after selling a tech business I built in Dallas. Bought this ranch near the lake 2 years ago for one reason apiece. I wanted nature, space, quiet mornings with the trees and fish. But what I didn't realize was that this peaceful lake community came with an HOA. And not just any HOA, this one was crawling with nosy neighbors. And sitting at the top of their little hierarchy was none other than Karen Lively. Karen was in her late 50s, tall, always donning oversized sun hats and lipstick too bold for sunrise. Her place was 2 lots over an ultra-modern glass-paneled house, solar panels, and an army of garden gnomes. She'd been president of the HOA for 8 years and acted like the neighborhood was her own private kingdom. We met the day I moved in. I was unloading boxes when she strutted over with a clipboard in one hand and a pie in the other. "Welcome to Maple Hollow Estates," she said with a stiff smile. "I'm Karen, HOA president. We like to keep things orderly around here." The pie was cold, her smile, colder. I tried being polite, even attended one of their monthly meetings. But it didn't take long to see this wasn't a neighborhood, it was a dictatorship. They had rules for mailbox paint, porch chair limits, even curtain styles. I kept to myself, not looking for drama. Mornings were for feeding my chickens, afternoons for casting a line off the dock. I started restoring an old barn on the far side of my land, too. That's why I bought the tractor. Nothing fancy. Just a well-worn John Deere, a little rusty, but still running strong. The day I brought it home, Karen nearly had a meltdown. "You're turning this into a construction zone," she snapped one morning. "I'm just fixing up my barn," I replied, eyes still on the steering wheel. She went off about noise restrictions, machinery permits, and community expectations. But here's the kicker: my property sits just outside the HOA's official jurisdiction. Their rules don't apply to me. But that didn't sit well with Karen. It absolutely burned her up that I didn't need her permission for anything. Still, I stayed civil, waved when I saw her, brought tomatoes from my garden to the last HOA picnic. But she was never satisfied. A few weeks before the rose stunt, she escalated, started reporting me for bogus violations, claiming my chickens were too loud, my fence didn't match, and once even filed a complaint that my American flag was flying too high. I didn't engage, just kept doing my thing. Then I came home one afternoon to find a sign nailed to my gate, closed for violation, HOA under investigation. That's when I knew she wasn't just being petty, she wanted a fight. Still, I didn't bite. Instead, I called the local zoning office. They laughed, told me I wasn't under any of her authority. So, I decided to take the high road, baked a pecan pie, walked over to her house, and offered it as a peace gesture. She didn't even come to the door. I left the pie on her porch and walked away. 3 days later, I woke up to find my road blocked. Rose bushes, pots, and Karen, grinning like a villain from a cartoon. Which brings us back to that unforgettable morning at the tractor, the roses, the roar of the engine, her outraged scream, and then the flashing lights. I thought, perfect, now we can settle this properly. But when I turned around and saw who stepped out of the cruiser broken bar, my got twisted, and not from nervousness, from pure disbelief. It was Deputy Gina Martinez. I hadn't seen her in nearly 4 years, not since we'd both walked away from the force. Back then, she was one of the few broken bar. Gina Martinez had once been one of the toughest and most clear-headed officers I'd ever served with. We did 2 tours together in Afghanistan before she returned home and became a deputy sheriff in our county. And now, here she was walking toward me with a half-curious, half-amused look on her face, crunching over shattered ceramic and scattered rose petals. Her hand rested casually on her hip, and though she was trying to keep a straight face, I caught the subtle twitch at the corners of her lips. Karen wasted no time. She sprang into performance mode, pointing at me like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "Officer, arrest him at once. He destroyed HOA property, a private property. He's completely out of control. He has to be removed from this community." Gina didn't even flinch. She calmly looked at Karen, then at me, then back to the mess at our feet. "Where exactly was all of this located?" she asked in a measured tone. Karen sniffed. "On my property. I placed them on the road to prevent him from using heavy machinery on an home-maintained street." I cleared my throat. "It's not whole land. That road is on my property. County zoning documents confirm it." Gina raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" I reached into my folder and handed her the official county zoning printout. I'd been carrying it around just in case Karen pulled a stunt like this. Karen grabbed the papers, eyes scanning them frantically, her face turning a bright shade of furious crimson. "That can't be right. The home map clearly marks that area as shared access." Gina gave her the kind of look you give someone who's used to throwing around authority they don't actually have. "Ma'am, unless you have official, legal documentation that overrides the county's property lines, this looks an awful lot like an attempt to obstruct a landowner from accessing their own property." Karen's mouth dropped open. "Boot a broken bar, but he destroyed my roses." "You placed them directly in front of an active work area," Gina replied, gesturing toward the barn. "That's a safety violation. You could have been seriously injured or worse." Karen stood frozen, clearly realizing the narrative wasn't going the way she'd hoped. "I want him arrested." Gina let out a quiet chuckle. "And I want world peace, but neither of us is getting our wish today." Karen stared, speechless. Gina continued, "I suggest you clean up whatever's left of your garden, ma'am, and stay off this road. It's not your jurisdiction." Karen stormed off, muttering bitterly under her breath, her red robe snapping behind her like a battle flag. I turned to Gina as she adjusted her belt. "Didn't expect to see you out here," I said. She smirked. "Didn't expect to be called out over a tractor versus flower bed situation either. This hoe has been lighting up dispatch lately." "Let me guess, Karen?" "She calls us more than the town's 911 line." We both laughed. For the first time in days, some of the tension in my shoulders eased. Then she looked around the property, her face turning more serious. "You sure you're okay living out here, Nate?" "She's not going to stop." I let out a long sigh. I thought if I kept my head down, she'd lose interest. But it feels like she's looking for a fight now. She is, and trust me, she's more than just irritating. She's clever, dangerous when she feels cornered. That stuck with me. I thanked her, and as she walked away, I spotted Karen standing on her porch, arms crossed, watching us with eyes cold and calculating. I hoped maybe that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, I received a certified envelope in the mail, not from the HOA but from Karen's attorney. She was suing me. Allegations of property damage, public endangerment, and emotional trauma. My hands shook as I read the claims. I was stunned. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. She was trying to destroy me. I took the letter into my study, poured a glass of iced tea, and sat down to stare out at the lake. This place was supposed to be my sanctuary, my peace. Somehow, it had turned into a legal war zone. That evening, my other neighbor, Ron, dropped by. He was in his 60s, a retired plumber with a sun-beaten face and a toothpick that was always in his mouth. "Word as you ran over the Queen's Roses," he said with a grin. "News travels fast," I replied. "Karen's been shouting about it to anyone within 6 houses." I handed him the lawsuit letter. He gave a low whistle. "She's not holding back." "I didn't even go near her property," I muttered. Ron leaned against my porch rail. "You know what you need?" he said, pulling the toothpick from his teeth. "You need to hit her where it hurts, not with force, with facts." "Proof." "Proof of what?" He leaned closer. "That she's breaking more HOA rules than anyone else on the block." That gave me pause. I hadn't considered that angle. Ron went on. "She's got chickens in her backyard and no permits." "That's a violation." "I've seen and that garden shed of hers, way bigger than HOA guidelines allow. Her fence is too tall, too, by at least 2 feet. Now that got my attention. Maybe I didn't have to keep playing defense. If I gathered enough evidence, I might get her removed from the board or at least force her to back off. So, I started watching closely, taking notes, logging dates and times, snapping photos from public areas of my property. But Karen must have sensed I was up to something, because just 3 days later, at 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by the sound of metal grinding on metal. I bolted out the door in my pajama pants, barefoot, hard hammering, and there she was, Karen, dressed in a dark hoodie, wielding a crowbar, sparks flying as she slashed through my tractor's tires. Before I could shout, she vanished into the night. I called the sheriff's department immediately, but this time, they didn't send Gina. They sent someone new, someone who didn't know me, and by the time I started explaining, it became obvious. Karen had already gotten to them first. Karen had beaten me to the call and told them I'd threatened her. So when the patrol car pulled up and a young deputy stepped out, I already knew things were about to get complicated. His name tag read T. Hansen, fresh face, straight back, and a cautious step. He looked like someone fresh out of the academy, walking onto his first real scene. I stood there beside my slashed tractor tires, barefoot, shirtless, holding a flashlight. My breath fogged in the cool air as the deputy swept his light across the area. Before I could get a word out, he lifted a hand. "Sir, please stay right where you are." I blinked. "You mean a broken bar here? On my own land? Until I understand the situation." "Yes, sir." He moved slowly around the tractor, examining the wreckage. One tire was completely flat, the rubber torn with long, deep cuts like someone had attacked it with a serrated blade. The other was barely holding together. His flashlight caught fresh gouge marks, evidence of a hurried, sharp assault. "She did it," I said calmly, pointing to the trees. "Karen Lively took off into the woods just before you arrived. If you go now, you might catch her." But Deputy Hansen didn't even glance toward the tree line. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a notepad. "We received a call earlier tonight from a Miss Lively. She claimed you threatened her, said she feared for her safety." I stared at him, stunned. "What? That's not true. She said you yelled at her earlier in the evening. Told her something bad was going to happen." "She's lying. That never happened." He gave a stiff nod, but his pen didn't move. I took a breath and kept my voice level. "She's been harassing me since I moved in. The tractor is just her latest target. She blocked the road a few days ago with flower pots. I drove through them." "She called the sheriff that day too?" asked Deputy Gina Martins as she handled it. "She's off duty this week," Hansen said flatly. "Out of state?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Yep, figures." "Come with me," I said, motioning toward the barn. My motion sensor camera caught everything. "You'll see her, the crowbar, the damage." That seemed to get his attention. Inside, I pulled up the footage. Clear as day there was Karen, her hoodie half pulled up, crouched by my tractor, driving the metal bar into the tire and jerking it violently. Hansen leaned forward, eyes narrowing. After a moment, he exhaled through his nose. "She'll be getting a visit tonight." "Does that mean charges?" He shrugged. "Depends on what else we find, but this changes the narrative." He turned and headed off in the direction she'd run. flashlight beam slicing through the woods. But I had a pit in my stomach. Karen wouldn't take this quietly. She'd twist it around. She'd already started. Sure enough, by the next morning, my inbox was full of HOA emails. Rumors were flying. Some neighbors said I had threatened Karen with tools. Others claimed I charged at her in a rage. The worst accusation? That I was endangering the entire community's sense of safety. Karen had posted a dramatic message on the HOA forum titled "Protecting Our Neighborhood from Aggressive Behavior." She'd attached blurry, zoomed-in photos of me working shirtless on my own land, spinning it into something sinister. 2 neighbors reached out to check if I was okay. The rest stayed silent, and their silence said everything. Karen had pull, and people feared her. After all, she had power over fines, citations, and formal complaints. One wrong move, and your life could become a nightmare. I tried to carry on. My replacement tires wouldn't arrive for another 3 days, so I walked the property instead, fed the chickens, checked the fencing after the storm. That afternoon, Ron showed up again, this time holding a steaming mug of black coffee. "She's really on a warpath now," he muttered. "You see that post?" I did. "Word is she's trying to get a restraining order," I said, laughing bitterly. "Even after being caught red-handed." "She's slippery," Ron replied. "And I heard something else. Her cousin works at the county permit office. She's filing a complaint to have your barn labeled non-compliant." My jaw tightened. The barn was old. Yeah, but I was restoring it under official historical preservation guidelines. She couldn't do anything about it legally. A broken bar, could she? The next day, a county inspector arrived unannounced. He wore a vest with a seal, held a clipboard, and carried a measuring tape. Not even a smile. "Routine inspection," he said. "Complaint was filed regarding unauthorized work on a non-residential structure." "You've got to be kidding me," I said. "Nope." I showed him everything: permits, zoning approvals, the preservation paperwork. He nodded slowly, but didn't give much away. "I'll need to review this with the office," he said before turning to leave. That's when I caught a glimpse of his phone screen as it lit up. The contact name said, K. Lively. She was pulling strings, from every angle, trying to suffocate me legally, socially, and financially. That evening, I sat on my porch staring out over the water. Frustration knotted in my chest, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered and the voice on the other end made my heart jolt. "Nate, it's Gina Martinez." "I thought you were out of town," I said, startled. "I was," she replied, her tone low and serious. "But I heard what happened at a broken bar. I just landed back in the state," Gina said. "Saw the incident report." I didn't waste a second. I told her everything about the tractor, the slashed tires, the bogus lawsuit, the slanderous post on the community board, and now the complaint over my barn's permits. "She's building something," I said grimly. "A trap." "She is," Gina agreed. "But she made one big mistake." "What's that?" "She forgot that I keep records." I sat up a little straighter. "I've got documentation of every single call she's made to dispatch in the last year," Gina continued. 93 in total. Most were baseless. I also submitted 2 internal memos raising concerns about her misuse of community policing requests. "Is that enough?" I asked. "Hard to say, but if it comes down to Ida, I'll testify." It was the first sliver of hope I'd felt in days. But it didn't last, because the very next morning, I walked into my barn to find it had been broken into, and spray-painted across the back wall, in jagged red letters, were the words, "Ho terrorist." It wasn't just graffiti. Someone had sliced into the support beams. The air stank of gasoline. There was a half-empty canister spilled in the corner and, lying in the middle of the floor, a used matchbox, a lighter, the unmistakable stench of accelerants soaked into the floorboards. Someone had tried to set the place ablaze. Sunlight streamed through a broken slat in the roof, illuminating the mess of my overturned workbench. Feed scattered across the floor, and those hateful red letters scrawled like a warning. But what chilled me most wasn't the message, it was the matchbox. On the label, one word, Karen's. It was a custom design. She'd had them made last fall for new home member welcome kits. My blood ran ice cold. This wasn't a prank. This was war. I knelt down carefully, pulled out my phone, and began filming. Every detail, every burn mark, every oily puddle. I documented it all. Then I called Gina. "Don't touch anything," she said immediately. I'm on my way with the fire marshal. An hour later, I heard her SUV crunching up the drive. She wasn't alone this time. A man in a gray uniform stepped out with her, clipboard in hand. State Fire Marshal. He got right to work. It took air samples, sealed the matchbox in an evidence bag, snapped photo after photo of the soaked beams. Gina stood beside me, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Someone fully intended to torch this place, the marshal finally said. Only reason it didn't burn is either the lighter failed or they lost their nerve. Gina met my eyes. That's attempted arson. And if we can prove who did it, a broken bar. I nodded. The matchbox. It's hers. Yeah, Gina muttered. Part of her HOA gift kits. Custom printed last October. Can you pull prints? We'll try, the marshal said. If gloves weren't used, we've got a chance. Gina turned to me. What about your security feed? Did it catch the break-in? My gut sank. I checked the footage. The camera recorded clear footage until exactly 2:14 a.m. Then static, black screen, nothing. The power glitched, I said. Tampering. I showed them the video, right up to the moment it cut out. She knew the blind spots. Gina murmured, this wasn't random. By midday, the barn had been officially sealed off for investigation. I sat under the pines beside Gina, both of us sipping coffee from mason jars, trying to calm the storm inside. You've got to be careful now, she warned. This is past neighborhood squabbles. It's a criminal matter. I know, I said quietly, but she's got the hoe wrapped around her finger. Not everyone, Gina said. Some folks are just scared. But if you show them what's really happening, a broken bar that sparked an idea. Over the next 2 days, I compiled everything I had, screenshots of Karen's inflammatory posts, the video from the Rose Garden standoff, pictures of her illegal chickens and oversized shed, and even a copy of her HOA spending from last quarter. I turned it all into a polished packet. Title page: The Truth About Karen Lively, What Your HOA Doesn't Want You to Know. Then I printed copy as a full color, neatly bound, no return address, no signature, and mailed one to every household in the neighborhood. By Friday night, the effects rippled like wildfire. My phone lit up with unknown numbers. I'm sorry I didn't believe you. Karen fined me for leaving my car window cracked. This is justice. She shut down my kid's lemonade stand. Count me in. I'm voting her out. Even Ron stopped by, grinning ear to ear. She's losing it, he said. People are finally waking up. She hasn't left her house in 2 days. But I knew Karen. She wouldn't retreat without a counterattack. And I was right. Because Sunday morning, I got another call. Blocked number. I answered and all I heard was a raspy voice whisper. You think this is over? You have no idea who I really am. Click. That was it. I stared at the phone, heart racing. The voice wasn't hers. It was a man. Deep, cold, menacing. I called Gina. She traced the call. It came from a burner phone. She's not acting alone, Gina said, or she's hiring help. Later that evening, another message came through, this time from Karen's official HOA number. Emergency HOA board meeting tonight. Mandatory attendance for all residents. I went. So did the entire neighborhood. Karen arrived last. Hair slicked back, blue blazer crisp, a folder clutched in her hands. She didn't glance my way. She stood at the front of the room, cleared her throat, and said, I've been under attack. A broken bar. My property's been destroyed. My safety threatened. My name dragged through the dirt. Karen began, her voice tremulous but loud. But I'm here tonight to restore order. She lifted a sheet of paper. This is a motion to ban the use of all heavy machinery in our community. No tractors, no power tools, no restoration projects of any kind. Any violations will be fined and reported. A ripple of disbelief moved through the room. Then a voice rose from the crowd. It was Melissa, quiet, soft-spoken Melissa, who lived 3 doors down from me. You tried to burn down his barn, she said clearly. Gasps erupted. Karen froze. That's absurd, she snapped. But Melissa wasn't done. She held up the packet I'd anonymously distributed. We've seen the proof. You've abused your authority. Karen's expression twisted with rage. You don't have the right. Oh, but then Ron stood up, then Sandra, then Brian. One by one, neighbors stood, faces firm, voices rising. And then, from the back of the room, a familiar figure stepped forward. Gina, now fully in uniform. "You may want to sit down, Karen," she said evenly. "We've obtained a warrant to search your property." Karen's complexion drained to gray, her lips parted a but before she could speak, she turned and bolted. She didn't walk out, she ran. One moment, she was standing in front of the room like a self-declared queen. The next, she was shoving through folding chairs, knocking a stroller sideways, and darting through the rear doors of the community hall. By the time we reached the exit, all we saw were the red taillights of her silver crossover racing away down the gravel lane that skirted the lake. Gina was already on her radio. "We've got a runner," she said calmly, sliding into her cruiser. "I'll find her." I stood there, stunned, surrounded by neighbors who didn't know what to say. Ron shook his head beside me. "She really ran. Guess she knows what's coming," I muttered. The next couple of hours passed in a blur. Gina texted updates as they tracked Karen's vehicle from the boat ramp to a deserted lot by the fishing pier. They finally caught up with her at a self-storage facility 2 towns over. She was trying to stash HOA records, including a locked metal box labeled, "Board Privates A Do Not Open." By morning, official charges had been filed: tampering with public records, filing false complaints, trespassing. The arson attempt was still under investigation awaiting lab analysis from the barn. Word spread fast, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt a broken bar lighter, like a noose had been cut from around all our necks. The HOA group chat blew up with jokes, memes, even photoshopped images of Karen riding a tractor while being chased by chickens. But for me, something still felt unfinished, because 2 things kept gnawing at me. First, the voice on the burner phone. That wasn't Karen. And second, that the break-in at my barn. Someone had poured gasoline and left a matchbox, but there were still no fingerprints. It didn't feel like just Karen anymore, which is why I decided to check out her property myself. Gina had warned me to stay away during the investigation, but Ron had other ideas. "She's got a storage shed out back," he said, "hidden behind her rose trellis. No one's ever allowed near it, but I've seen her sneak papers in and out before home meetings." We waited until early evening, then crept around the back of her lot. The house was quiet. Yellow police tape still fluttered on the patio. No sign of anyone watching. Ron led the way, flashlight in hand. Behind the overgrown rose bushes, we found Ida, a tall shed made of newer wood, secured with a thick padlock. Ron reached into his pocket. "That a lockpick?" I asked. "Plumbing tool," he said with a wink. "Close enough." While I kept watch, he worked the lock. Within a minute, the latch clicked and the door creaked open. Inside, the space was packed of file boxes, cabinets, binders stacked to the ceiling, thousands of pages of HOA documentation. But in the far corner was something far more disturbing: a corkboard covered in photos, names, red string, notes. It looked like something out of a crime show. Every photo was of someone in the neighborhood. Ron stepped closer. "That's a broken bar. That's my wife." My face was there too, circled in red ink. Next to it, sticky notes read, "Owns firearm, barn construction, connected to Gina, must be isolated." This wasn't just micromanagement. This was obsession, surveillance, stalking. Ron pulled a manila folder from a nearby shelf. Inside were emails printed out, back and forth messages between Karen and someone named M. Stokes. "Recognize the name?" I asked. Ron's jaw tightened. "Yeah, he's not local. Lives past the county line. Used to run a private security firm." My stomach turned. Why would Karen be working with someone like that? We kept digging, and the further we went, the worse it got. Invoices, wire transfers, schematics of neighborhood camera feeds. And then, one document stopped me cold. A building permit application filed under my name. It was for demolition and reconstruction of a residential structure on HOA property. My signature was forged. Everything was fake. Ron leaned over my shoulder. "She was trying to make it look like you were building illegally a broken bar so she could take your land." My hand tightened around the forged document. "She wasn't just trying to ruin me," I said quietly. "She wanted to bury me." The next morning, I brought everything to Gina, every file, every photo, every connection we'd uncovered. She flipped through the evidence, her expression growing darker with every page. "This isn't just HOA abuse anymore," she said grimly. "This is conspiracy, fraud, stalking. If she has a partner, we'll find him." I already did, I told her. M. Stokes. She froze. Marshall Stokes? You know him? Gina's jaw clenched. Yeah. Ex-cop, dirty past, booted from the force for harassment years ago, tried to disappear, but people like that always pop back up. Last I heard, he was doing a private enforcement consulting. That's code for, he gets paid to intimidate people. My stomach twisted. We're going to his place, she said, standing. You coming? Try and stop me. We rolled out that afternoon, 3 cruisers in total. Stokes's cabin sat deep in the woods, surrounded by a tall fence, motion lights, and heavy silence. It looked more like a survivalist's compound than a home. As we pulled in, Gina gave me a look. If anything gets messy, stay behind me. We knocked once. No answer. Knocked again. Then the door creaked open, and there he stood, broad-shouldered, gray stubble, eyes like ice. You're trespassing, he growled. We've got a few questions, Gina said calmly, holding up the folder. Recognize your name? He didn't flinch. I've got nothing to say. But as she stepped forward, I spotted something behind him on the cluttered workbench by the wall. It was my matchbox, the same one found in the barn. You tried to burn it, I said. His eyes locked onto Minya just for a second, then he bolted. He tore through the back door and into the woods without a word, fast and silent for a man his size. Son of a, Gina cursed, then sprinted after him. 2 deputies followed. I hesitated only a second, then ran too. The trees behind the cabin were dense and tangled. Branches snapped against my arms, roots twisted underfoot. But I could hear him crashing through the brush ahead of us, zigzagging like he knew every trail. He's heading west, Gina called. Cut him off. I veered right, lungs on fire. The land dipped sharply toward the lake. I slid halfway down the slope, nearly lost my footing, and then saw him. Stokes burst onto the trail that looped around the far edge of Lake Douglas, 30 yards ahead. I dropped low, caught my breath, and sprinted. Stop, I yelled. You won't make it. But he didn't stop. Instead, he lunged toward a commo tarp beside a tree stump, yanking it back to reveal a stashed motorbike. But before he could fire it up, Gina slammed into him from the side. The impact was brutal. They hit the dirt hard. The bike clattered away. One of the deputies rushed in. Between the two of them, they had Stokes cuffed and pinned in seconds, panting and covered in leaves. You think this changes anything? He sneered. Gina didn't say a word, but her glare was answer enough. We hauled him back to his cabin, and that's when things got worse. Inside, deputies uncovered files, dozens of them, each one labeled with name as mine, Ron's, Gina's, a broken bar, even a few children in the neighborhood. Then, in a locked drawer, they found a USB drive. Gina slid it into her cruiser's laptop. What came up made my blood run cold. Emails, audio recordings, surveillance plans, some from Karen, some from Stokes, and some from a third name, F. Bernard. Another one? I asked. Gina's face hardened. HOA treasurer, been handling their money for years. The files laid everything bare. Karen, Stokes, and Bernard had been working together, coordinating a long-term campaign to control the HOA, intimidate homeowners, and drive out anyone who didn't fit their vision. They weren't just power-hungry, they were clearing the neighborhood for a private land deal, planning to flip the properties to commercial buyers, including mine. I found an email from Karen to Bernard that read, "Once Nate's out, we can rezone the lot under your name and sell to Blue Oak Hospitality. His barn is perfect for weddings. He doesn't belong here anyway." My hands trembled. It was never about rules, not roses, not tractors. It was about profit. And I was in the way. By morning, Gina had the full case ready. Karen, Stokes, and Bernard were each charged with conspiracy, falsifying HOA authority, harassment, and for Stokes attempted arson. Bernard was picked up quietly at her office downtown. Karen was denied bail. Stokes lawyered up, but the evidence stacked against him was immovable. Still, the neighborhood was in chaos. No HOA president, no treasurer, no scheduled meetings, just confusion and shock. That's when Ron stood up literally at an emergency town gathering held under a white tent by the lake. "I think we owe Nate an apology," he said, voice steady and loud. "He tried to warn us, and we didn't listen." A few people nodded. One lady clapped, and then as slowly as the sound grew, Melissa stood next to broken bar. Melissa stood up next. "We need a new board," she said. "People who live here not rule it. People who care about this place, not control it." A voice shouted from the back, "Let Nate be president." I shook my head, laughing softly. "I didn't come here to lead," I said honestly. "I came here for peace and quiet." Then I paused, eyes scanning the crowd of people I once thought were silent, indifferent, even complicit. Now they looked at me differently, with respect, with hope. "Maybe," I said slowly, "what this place needs a broken bar is someone willing to speak plain truth." The crowd leaned in. "I'll do it," I finally said, "but on one condition." Everyone fell silent. No more fines for paint colors. No more tape measures and yard signs and rosas as weapons. "And if someone's got a rooster broken bar, let it grow." Laughter broke out, a real, joyful laughter, not the nervous kind I'd heard in town halls before. This was different. This was release. That night, I stood on my porch watching the moon cast silver across the lake. The water was still. My barn, cleared by the fire marshal, stood tall again. My tractor had new tires. The roses that once blocked my path are gone. But there was one last thing I needed to do. At dawn, I fired up the tractor and drove it slowly down the old path where Karen's prized rose garden had once stood. Ron was waiting there, leaning against a shovel. I hopped down with a wooden crate in hand. "Wildflowers," I said. "Figured you'd plant something real." Ron said, smiling, "Something that grows free." I added. We scattered seeds in silence, letting the wind carry them over the soft dirt. Then we stood back, hands in our pockets, feeling the breeze move through the trees. Peace, finally. But just as I turned to head back to my cabin, my phone buzzed. A message from a blocked number. "The HOA isn't done. You just scratched the surface." I stared at the screen. No reply option, no ID, just a shadow in the quiet. Gina called 5 minutes later. "I traced the number," she said. "Encrypted routing. Someone went to a lot of trouble to hide it. This isn't some amateur. This is calculated. You think it's someone we missed, maybe, or someone higher up." She paused, then added, "You remember those land transfer documents we pulled from Stokes's files?" "Yeah, well, I went deeper into them last night. One of them lists a second LLC, silent partner on the proposed sale of your land." "What name?" "Larkland Developments LLC, Delaware registered." Squeaky clean on paper, but their agent's tied to a real estate conglomerate that's been buying up lakefront property all over the state. So this wasn't just Karen's crusade. She was a puppet. Someone else was pulling the strings. "Why would they care so much about my little patch of dirt?" I asked. Gina's voice dropped. "Because yours is the last unincorporated plot on this side of Lake Douglas. If they rezone it, it connects the entire shoreline. 10 years they've been trying." I looked out at the water, still, calm, beautiful, and beneath it, war. "So what now?" I asked. "We go public," she said. "File a countersuit. Demand a full audit. Call the community together. Tell them the truth." "You think they'll believe me?" "They will now," she said. "You earned it." That night, I stayed up preparing. The next morning, under the big pine pavilion by the lake, I called a full HOA assembly. People came, dozens of them, even the ones who'd kept their heads down until now. I stood up and told the whole truth. Karen's smear campaign, Stokes's surveillance, Bernard's manipulation, and behind them all Larkland. I played audio clips, handed out redacted emails, showed maps and documents that had been buried for years. For a long time, no one spoke, just silence. Then a voice from the back of Frank, the oldest resident in the neighborhood, cleared his throat. "I always wondered why the public dock never got repaired." Karen blamed budget cuts, but we raised that money, more than once. A woman up front stood. "Bernard told me my land value went up, but they never even surveyed it. My taxes tripled." Piece by piece, it fell into place. The neighborhood hadn't been a community, it had been a business, and we were the product. That afternoon, the remaining board members were voted out. I was named interim president. I didn't want it, but I accepted, because someone had to stand between this place and the next storm on the horizon. With Gina's help, I hired a land use consultant and filed formal complaints with the State Housing Board. We froze all asset transfers pending an investigation and demanded a full forensic audit at 10 years' worth. A week later, there was a knock at my door. Melissa handed me an envelope. Inside was a grainy black and white photo, captured by a wildlife camera near Karen's mailbox. Two men in suits, one pointing at a map, the other wearing a Larkland Developments lanyard. They weren't done. They were circling, watching, waiting, but what they didn't know was this. I'd rebuilt that barn board by board with my own hands. I'd earned every square foot of this land, and I wasn't going anywhere. That afternoon, I climbed onto my tractor and rumbled down the dirt path past the rose gardenia, now a living field of wildflowers swaying in the breeze. As the wind picked up, the petals danced. I thought of Karen, of all her rules and raging roses, and I smiled, because no matter how much money they had a broken bar, no matter how many bylaws they rewrote a broken bar, they forgot the one truth that matters out here. You don't mess with a man's land, especially not one with a tractor or a broken bar, and a spine of steel. So if you're ever passing Lake Douglas and spot a field of wildflowers blooming in the middle of a dusty road, know this: every single bloom grew where Bully once stood.